Hi, guys. Joel, Western Culture Through God's Eyes. So, this is the long-awaited part two to human migration. So, you haven't seen that one, go ahead and check that one out. So, this is the timeline. We got one that I put together from creation all the way to Solomon's death. And then also, we have Dr. Dino's from creation all the way to the death of Joseph. So, I'm going to go ahead and screen share those. All right. So, I'm Joel, and my wife is Leor, getting all IT savvy up in here. So that's saying a lot for me because I was born in 1899. So this is epic right here. So all right. So I've been working on this since 2013. So this is 10 years in the making. I'm so passionate about stuff like this, about history, because we don't hear it anywhere, not even in church, definitely not in school. And then we get lied to it about it in school and on TV and movies and et cetera, et cetera. So this is truly unique. Chances are there's an over 99% chance that you have never seen this before. I was considering using the mouse, but I'm not going to because there's a lag, and you can see the timeline, and it will be quicker if I don't use it. So so I finally put together all the dates correctly after 10 years. And it takes some reading, it takes some patience, some learning, some note taking, and some addition and subtraction. So anyone can do this, just most people just don't have the patience or the diligence to do it. So I'm so excited to bring this to you guys. So this is the timeline, the true history of the world. So I'm going to walk you through all the dates and the events, and then after I do that, I'll go ahead and show you how we found that, and I'll give you evidence for each of that. So this is so fascinating because you're never going to see this in church. And you're not going to hear this in Bible study, and you're definitely not going to learn this in school. So this is something brand new that you've never seen before. So creation, based on the way we keep time today, and I'll touch on that a little bit later after I walk through the timeline, is creation would be the year 3890 BC. So 3890 BC is when creation happened, the Garden of Eden. And then the pre-flood world lasted 1,656 years. And then the flood occurred. And the flood was in 2234 BC, 2234 BC. So all dates before that can only be found by Hebrew sources. All dates before that, secular dates, are all false and correct. And that's the tricky thing about studying history, because they lie to you in every aspect of life. They lie to you in science class. They lie to you in sociology class, and they even lie to you in history class, unfortunately. So every single person is biased and has an agenda. And so in secular people do too, in schools and in colleges, etc. So the flood occurred in 2234. So before that was the pre-flood world, right? And so all of secular history takes place after the flood, obviously. And so the information about the pre-flood world is only found in Genesis, in Jasher, and Jubilees. Those are the only three sources for the pre-flood world. So, in Enoch also too, the book of Enoch. Okay, so 292 years after the flood, Nimrod begins his rule. And so that was in 1942 BC. So about 300 years after the flood occurs, plenty of time, Nimrod begins his rule and conquers his empire. And I showed that in human migration. And so it was the heart of the Near East. It was all of Mesopotamia. It was the northern Levant, and it was southeast Anatolia, which we call Cilicia later on in history, and also Elam as well. So basically Mesopotamia and a little bit outside of that. So now secular history calls him Sargon in his empire Akkad, Sargon of Akkad, the Akkadian Empire. But the Bible, the Hebrew text, calls him Nimrod and calls his empire the Babylonian Empire. Now that's tricky because there's a lot of Babylonian empires over time. This was the first one, and there's a bunch in the middle, right? There was one with Hammurabi, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last one was with Nebuchadnezzar II in 600 BC, the guy that conquers Judah in 586. So there was a bunch of Babylonian empires. This one was the first one, right? So Sargon of Akkad was the same guy as Nimrod of Babel. This was the guy that did the Tower of Babel. So pretty epic. So this was the first empire that the post-flood world had ever seen. And so for more information on him, you can check out actually Bob Dice. Came out in 2009, and his series is called Ancient Empires Before Alexander. It's from the Great Learning Courses, now called Wondrium. But you got to be tricky because, of course, like they have an agenda. And anytime like a date from Hebrew history conflicts with a date from evolution or a date from Egyptian history, they're obviously going to go with every non-Hebrew source they can. So, all right. So after Nimrod begins his reign, you have 10 years there, and Abraham goes to live with Noah. And Noah's 902 years old, and Abraham's 10. So that's 1932 BC. That's epic. So there's a whole story about these two, Abraham and Nimrod and Jasher, which Genesis doesn't cover because Genesis is a summary. And Jasher gives you much more details about this story. It's very, very cool. So Abraham was in hiding. There was a prophecy and a star, and Nimrod tried to kill him. And it's pretty epic. So it's a parallel too to the Messiah. There was a prophecy about his birth, and then Nimrod tries to kill him in a fiery furnace eventually, like Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Nebuchadnezzar II, and God saves him. So anyway, so Abraham lived with Noah. So like the flood of Noah wasn't myth, hearsay, legend. Noah lived with, or Abraham lived with Noah. And also who he was living with was some of his descendants. So Noah's son was Shem, and then his son was Eber. So there's another, I'll show you another, we're going to go over this one too for more details. So Noah and his son Shem, oh, I'm using the mouse. And then this would be great grandson Eber, all the way down to Abraham. It's so incredibly epic. So, this is a good time to touch on this actually. So check this out. So 2,309 years of history is covered by the life of three men: Adam, that lived to be 930 years old, and Dr. Dino's got a great, fantastic video about why that could be. Good scientific reasons. Make a long story short, there was more oxygen in the air at that time. Watch his video. It'd be number 2, the Garden of Eden. But we've actually found oxygen bubbles in amber, and they found that there's 50% more oxygen in those bubbles. So it's 32% instead of about 21%. With more oxygen in the air, it actually makes you have a higher red blood cell content, and that would actually give you more energy. It would allow you to repair your body faster, like a hyperbaric oxygen chamber allows you to, run faster, live longer, heal faster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Dr. Dino, Kent Hovind speculates that was a reason they could have been able to live longer, plus a perfect diet. So, but yeah, the more oxygen in the air, make a long story short. So Adam's life overlaps that of Methuselah, who was Noah's grandpa. Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. So Lamech was Noah's dad. So Noah's dad knew Adam for 182 years. So it wasn't like hearsay, myth, legend. Noah's dad knew Adam for 182 years. Noah's dad told him, I was like, oh yeah, I knew the first guy ever created for 182 years. And then he died at 930 years old. So, and then Jasher says that Methuselah was the longest man who ever lived. He lived to be 969 years old. That he and Noah together, Noah and his grandpa Methuselah, preached righteousness, preached salvation, tried to warn them about the upcoming flood for 120 years. And guess what? Everyone on the earth said, that's never happened before, so you're crazy, so we're not going to believe it till we see it. And they all died. And then Jasher says that 700,000 people rushed the ark, but the way was shut. It was made by those who are dead. Dead keep it. Lord of the Rings, number 3. Anyway, so God always tries to warn people, and the same story keeps repeating itself over and over and over again. No one believes it until it's forced upon them. By then, it's too late. So quite a parallel for people's lifetime and until they die, and then they're facing God and they want to get into heaven, and he's like, oh nope, you didn't meet the criteria. I read a whole book. You spent your whole life in rebellion against me, want to live away from me, so now you get to live away from me in the fire. Enjoy. And for the end times as well. So Methuselah and Noah tried to save you 120 years, didn't have a single convert. So if truth is dictated by the majority, well, then then the Bible's not true, and Noah and the 8 people weren't true either. So as we can see, and we think that maybe 1 billion people died in the flood. So only 8 people were saved, less than 1%. So the moral of the story is, like, God is not going to grade on a grading curve. Everyone's like, well, I'm not going to believe it until I see it. I'm not going to actually obey Torah until the Messiah enforces it in the 1,000-year reign. I'm not going to care at all about the Bible, what God expects of me, until I see him in person, until it's enforced. But So as we saw with the flood, and he's like, well, I'm in good company. If I'm, if gosh, everyone can't be wrong. If a Christian's interpretation of the Bible, I like that one. That one's convenient. 2 billion people can't be wrong. Blah blah blah. Guys, everyone's wrong. Just get used to it. Get comfortable with it. 8 people were saved out of a billion. Okay, we've got a billion Hindus. We've got a billion Muslims, or we got 2 billion Muslims. We've got a billion Buddhists. We have 2 billion Christians. Half are Catholic, half are Protestant. We have 0.5, only 0.5% are Jews, and we got a bunch of people that believe in miscellaneous stuff. We probably have a billion atheists, and then Messianic Jews, the way Nazarenes, Messianic Jews are less than 0.5%. So, like, the majority doesn't dictate truth, and God's not going to grade on a grading curve. He's not. He's not going to grade on a grading curve. Literally, if no one's saved, or if there's one person or 2 people or 8 people, so be it. Like, you have all the rules in advance, and if you don't want to live how he wants you to live, how he requires you to live, how he told all humans should, spelled out in Exodus, Deuteronomy, well, you're just not going to cut it. You're not going to make it. You're going to be burned up in the fire. So, okay. So Noah lived 600 years before the flood, and then 500 years after the flood, and lived to be 950 years old. And Shem lived to be 100 in the pre-flood world, and then he would be 500 years after the flood. So this is so epic. So as you can see, they all lived to be over 900 years old, almost 1,000 years in the pre-flood world. And then their lifespan starts dropping off because the earth destroyed the flood destroyed the pre-flood world, and there's less oxygen in the air. And so by the Shem 600, and then his son Arphaxad is 400, and then you get the Peleg down to 200, and Abraham almost 200, 175, and then Isaac 180, Jacob 147, Joseph 110. So check this out. Shem, a flood survivor, is still alive during the life of Jacob. So Jacob knew Shem. So Abraham knew Shem and Noah. Isaac knew Noah. And Noah had died by the time Jacob was around. So Jacob knew Shem. So Joseph's dad knew someone on the ark. So the three men's lives are Adam, and then Methuselah, and then Shem. These three men's lifespans span 2,309 years. Epic indeed. So, all the way to when Joseph was vice pharaoh of Egypt, again, it wasn't legend, it wasn't myth. Joseph's like, my dad knew someone on the ark. So, and we'll cover when Joseph was too. So Joseph's like, my dad knew someone on the ark, and Shem's dad, Noah, knew the longest man who ever lived, Methuselah, and Methuselah knew Adam for over 200 years. So, Shem's dad, Noah, knew Methuselah, etc. So you can see how that overlaps. Jacob was still alive when Shem was on the ark. Noah goes back to Methuselah, or even Lamech, back to Adam. So you have eyewitnesses accounts going all the way back to creation. Okay, back to the timeline. Alrighty, so Abraham was 10 years old, lived with Noah. Noah was 102 and 932. 35 years after that, the Tower of Babel was destroyed. So it looks like it took about 45 years to create the Tower of Babel. And this thing was massive. Jasher has a description on it. It says that it was, we think it was at least 2 miles high. And they said it took a 3-day journey to walk around the entire circumference of the base of the tower, and that it took workers. It took them 1 year to walk, to have a brick to go like from the bottom all the way to the top. So very epic story, very interesting story. And then eventually it said it was destroyed by, God destroyed it with lightning, destroyed a third, an earthquake destroyed another third. And it said that a third of it lasted for a very long time, all the way up in Joshua's lifetime. It said a third of it was still there as like a witnessing tool for the world. So, so the Tower of Babel was destroyed in 1897. Epic indeed, because all the way up to this point, they only spoke one language, And since the Sumerians is what they called like Noah and his kids and his grandkids. The Sumerians that lived in Mesopotamia. And so now we know from stone tablets that they wrote in cuneiform. It's chicken scratch. It looks like backslashes and forward slashes. So cuneiform must have been their language at that time, going back to creation in whatever language that was. So That is very interesting. And so, and then God created 70 languages at the Tower of Babel and spread them out throughout the world. So that's where, different languages came from. So 25 years after the Tower of Babel was destroyed, this is an important date. You have God's promise to Abraham. Sorry, the 2,309 years goes all the way to Joseph's death. Almost. Shem died during the life of Joseph's dad, Jacob. So, all right, now, so this is an interesting day we're going to cover here at the end. So God appeared or didn't appear. He spoke verbally to Abraham and gave him a promise of what was going to happen in the future. His descendants will live in Canaan forever, going all the way to the 1,000-year reign with Messiah. So that was in the year 1872. And then 105 years after God spoke to Abraham, Nimrod dies. So he lives quite a while. And that was 1787. So Nimrod was the first Antichrist. He was considered half God, half man. He was a giant. And he was like the anti-Messiah, he's considered that like Satan in the flesh. I'm sure Satan was indwelling him. So Nimrod dies in 1767. It's interesting that Jasher says that Esau actually kills him, at 15 years old with a bow and arrow, actually, when he was hunting. And then he was trying to escape for his life, and Nimrod's bodyguards were trying to kill him. And that's why he sold his birthright for a bowl of porridge, because he thought like he was a dead man anyway. So that makes the story in Genesis make a lot more sense. So 3 years after that, Jacob visits Shem. So again, Jacob firsthand goes, to Shem's house in Haran on the Euphrates River in the northern Levant in 1764. 102 years after that, Joseph becomes the vice pharaoh in 1662. So that's a really important date. 10 years later after that, all the Hebrews moved to Goshen, right, from southern Canaan in the year 1652 into Goshen, the northeast Nile Delta. So, so that'd be Jacob, and it was 70 people total. So not very many. And then 71 years pass, and Joseph dies. And 23, and that's the year 1581. 23 years after that, this is when they're enslaved in bondage, 1558 BC. Very important date. And it was the pharaoh Malal that enslaved them. That's what Jasher says. So, and that's spelled Melor. And there's several different like variations of his spelling, but that's what they call him in Jasher, Malal, Melol. They also call him like Meror, Meror, and there's like one more. We'll just call him Malal. So they spent 116 years in bondage. So bondage, it wasn't 400 years or 430, it was 116. And I'll explain that at the end of the timeline here. So 116 years in slavery. And then the Exodus is 1442. Super important date. So they wander in the wilderness, which is in Arabia, for 40 years. And that's 1402. So the Exodus, they cross the Sinai Peninsula, falsely so called, takes them about a week. They cross the Red Sea at the Gulf of Aqaba, where the Sinai Peninsula splits it, Gulf of Suez, Gulf of Aqaba, and they cross over into Midian. So Galatians 4:25 says that Mount Sinai is in Midian, and Midian is in Arabia. So that's where Mount Sinai is. It's not in the peninsula, it's in Arabia. And then they were going to go right to Canaan. You guys all know the story. There was 12 spies, and 10 of them came back and said, "There's giants in the land. There's no way we can do it." But Jacob and Caleb say, "Well, normally we couldn't, but we have God on our side. So with His supernatural help, we can." And so, and then the people were complaining. They're like, "Oh my gosh, we're gonna die. We might as well go back to Egypt." So between those two incidences, like we had a better variety of food. We're so sick and tired of manna and water. We had melons and we had onion and garlic and all the things. Let's go back to Egypt. And the spies like, there's no way, even with God's help, that we can take over Canaan. So God's like, okay, screw you guys. I'm done with you. And I tell this story in Christianity and Judaism. So he has them wander in the Arabian wilderness. So this is the only wilderness that's there. They were already there anyway. It's the only one big enough where they can wander for 40 years and not just be walking in a small little tight circle. And he allows the older generation to die of old age. and have an attitude adjustment. And then their kids, the younger generation, gets to go into Canaan and Jericho. So when they end up at Jericho by the River Jordan, it's 1402. So end of wandering in the wilderness in Arabia. Now it takes Joshua and the Hebrews 6 years to conquer Canaan, and they conquered by 1396. And Joshua lives 22 more years, and then he dies in the year 1374. These are all BC dates. And remember, BC dates work backwards, and that's how we keep time today. We should be keeping time from creation. And at the end, I'll say what that would be. But yeah, I'm keeping time according to the way we keep time today. Now, the time of the judges was 343 years with Samson and Gideon, etc., Deborah, all the way to Saul. So the start of the reign of King Saul was 1031 BC. He reigns for 25 years, and then David becomes king in 1006 BC. He reigns for 40 years, and he dies, and his son Solomon becomes king in 966. And then he starts building the temple 900 or 4 years after that, 962. And then Solomon lives 40 more years, and then he dies of old age, and then that's 926 BC. And then at that point, his sons have a civil war. You know, the 10 northern tribes and the 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, become Judah, the southern kingdom, and then the northern kingdom is the top 10 tribes in the north. So the kingdom is split from then on out, unfortunately. Okay, so we will now we're going to talk about where we find these dates from, etc. So if we were keeping time that we were supposed to, so BC means before Christ, and AD means Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, and that's how we keep time today. And they started keeping time like that in the Middle Ages. So it hasn't been that long in the scheme of things that we've been doing it that way. But the way that we should have kept time is from creation would be year 0, and then today would be, whatever number that would be. And so what number that is so creation would be the year 0, and if we were keeping time that we were supposed to, it would be the year 5,000 5,913. All right, so we'd be in the year 5913 AM, 5,913. So, and Jazz uses a term called AM. It's a Latin term, and it means it's a Latin word that means since creation, anno mundi, since creation. So 5913. So we're in the year 5913. So it's strange. Like the traditional Jewish calendar is off. They think it's the year like around 5800. It's like they think it's like 5790 or whatever. So I'm not sure why they're missing those dates, but they are there. And this is pretty epic because on the traditional, all the creation speakers that I've ever heard, they have creation around the year 4000 or 4004. So they're off too. They have it too old by over 100 years, like by 114 years. So this is very epic indeed. Okay, so now, so these are the dates that are indisputable, starting with the start of the reign of King Saul. So no one disputes, either biblical or secular, when Solomon started his reign 926, and then he reigned for 40 years, and before that, David started his reign in 1006, and then Saul started his reign in 1031. So this date right here is absolutely indisputable, 1031. But before that, it's a big question mark. Secular historians start becoming ignorant and start becoming dishonest about Canaan history in Canaan, history in the southern Levant, Hebrew history in the southern Levant, starting with the time of the judges before 1031 BC. You can't even trust what you're learning from secular historians before 1031 BC, which, all things considered, is not that long ago, is relatively recently in the scheme of things, right? So that was 3,000 years ago, but there was 3,000 years history before that. So if you can't trust them about what happened here, if they don't know what happened in the southern Levant here, why the heck would you trust them what happened 3,000 years before that, or what happened, millions and billions of years before that? So a joke indeed. All right. So now these little colored arches are the key to finding that out. So the first one we have is 480 years. 1 Kings 6:1. It said that from the start of the building of Solomon's temple, which we know started 4 years into his reign. In the fourth year of Solomon's reign, 962, 480 years before that was the Exodus. That's 1 Kings 6:1 is where you get that date. So you can do simple math, simple addition, and realize that Exodus is 1442. Secular historians, they don't even know when the Exodus happens. They say it didn't happen at all, or they say, oh, it probably happened during the reign of Ramses II. They put it in the 1200s. Totally incorrect. You can see some more about that in human migration. So I'm gonna keep on here. Now, before this, um, this and then we have I'm gonna go with where like the big mystery was, especially for me. So that was a cool piece of the puzzle. Now I knew this a long time ago, starting back in 2002 when I was 15, when I saw Dr. Dino's 7-part seminar series, Kent Hovind. I realized that this yellow arch here. So there's 2,309 years from creation all the way to the death of Joseph, right? 2,309 years. We get that from Genesis chapter 5 and 11. So that's where that comes from. You know, when it says like Adam was 130 years old and he begat Seth, and it goes all the way to Joseph's death, and you're like, why are these boring chronologies in there? It's so that you can put together a timeline like this. That's exactly why that's in there. So I knew this yellow arch here. I didn't know the details though. I knew because it says here on his chart when Adam was born, etc. And then you've got Enoch. Let's go on Noah, Shem, all the way to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph. To get more of these details, like to fill in a lot of these gaps here, there's canonized scripture, there's Jasher, there's Jubilees, and there's Josephus for more information for some of these dates, some of these little guys where I found those guys in. Now, so the big question was, how long was it from the Exodus to when Joseph died? When Joseph died to when how was the in-between time? How long did it take when Joseph died before they were in bondage? How long did bondage last? And when did the Exodus happen? So this was the big question mark right here. So I was confused too. So, you look at Exodus 12:40 and it says, and everyone's like, oh yeah, they were in Egypt for 430 years. Oh, they were in bondage for 430 years, but they weren't in bondage for 430 years. That would be, it says they sojourned in Egypt for 430 years. So, and we all know that they lived there for 71 years before they were enslaved. Okay, so it's not just the time that they were in bondage. And then at first you're like, oh, well, then that must have been when the Hebrews moved down to Goshen, which is what I thought too. However, based on all of the other sources, it has to be interpreted in this way. That it was from the promise to Abraham in 1872. So that's found in Galatians 3:16 to 17. That you go 480 years from the Exodus to when God spoke to Abraham and gave him the promise. So then you can do subtraction and find all the other dates. And so not only that, Scripture says that you have to have a minimum of 2, but preferably 3. You have to have 3 or more sources to establish all truth. And so that's no more true than in history with historical sources. You have to have 3 historians saying, "Hey, this is how it happened," to say, "Okay, hey, this is a historical fact." If you don't have that, it's not as credible. So we have Exodus 12:40, Galatians 3:16 to 17. We have Jasher, Jubilees, and Josephus all saying the same thing. So we have to interpret Exodus 12:40 in light of Galatians 3:16 to 17, Jasher, Jubilees, and Josephus, because they all tell the same story. Very interesting indeed. And that makes a whole lot more sense. I always thought like it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for God just to leave the Hebrews in slavery for 430 years. That just sounds like cruel and neglectful. Well, he didn't. It was 116. Okay, so so those are the sources that explain this red arc right here. And then you can do the subtraction. So the Hebrews lived in Goshen, the Nile Delta, for 210 years, and slavery lasted 116. So some ways to explain Exodus 12:40 is when Galatians 3:16 to 17 clearly states it. It was from the promise to the Exodus. It was 430 years. So you know, so when God moved Abraham to Canaan, Canaan was under Egyptian influence. It was considered a part of the Egyptian realm. So he would have been living in Egypt for 430 years. And as we know, Abraham went down to the Nile Delta. There was a whole incident with Sarah and the Pharaoh there, and him taking Sarah, etc., and then finding out they were married and said it was his sister, and he got and he went back to Canaan. Um, and Yep. So that's how it explains it. And if you actually look in the footnotes, if you look in the footnotes, the Bible that I use most often, I have been for the last 10 years, is the New King James Version. And it's and it literally says that in the text, in the Masoretic text, like the mainstream text that goes back to the Dead Sea Scrolls, the most credible text, it read that the Hebrews lived in Egypt and Canaan for 430 years. So our modern English translations actually it really is just bad wording. It's a bad translation. So like what the reading should have said was that in Exodus 12:40 was from the time that God spoke to Abraham and gave him a promise of the land of Canaan and his descendancies, and from the time that he had him move to Canaan, which was in Egyptian territory, was 430 years. But they just sum it up for brevity purposes and says the Hebrews sojourned in the land of Egypt for 430 years. So, oh gosh, like another point I want to touch on too is like the judges. So, the secular historians say that Egypt had direct control over the Levant as part of their empire in the time of the judges, right before King Saul, and that is incredibly not true. In 1442, Egypt was devastated, and if you look carefully, if you study deep and wide, there's actually a great source to see that. I reference it in the Proof of the Exodus. That's where the video is, and it's Patterns of Evidence: The Exodus by Timothy P. Mahoney, and they show Egyptian sources talking about the 10 plagues that came upon Egypt and how devastated it was in 1442. And so the Exodus, the Pharaoh, the Exodus was King Tutmos the Fourth. That was the Pharaoh in Exodus 1442, King Tutmos the Fourth. And Egypt was devastated by that, and the Nubians conquered him from the south, and like a desert fringe people called the Hyksos conquered them in the north. They were absolutely devastated. They were destroyed. And that's what you get when you are in open defiance against the one and only God. That's the Father, Yahuwah. And so after that, all the way to King Saul, you had independent Canaanite city-states in the land of Canaan. You had the Philistines in Canaan. You had the Phoenicians in the northern Levant. And then you had small kingdoms to the east of the Dead Sea. You had you had the Amorites in the desert fringe. You had the Midianites south along the Gulf of Aqaba, and then east of the Dead Sea, you had Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Very small kingdoms about the size of Rhode Island. And from south to north, you had Edom, Moab, and Ammon. So and like the Hebrews were afraid of the Canaanites because they were giants. It's such an incredible story. So Rob Skiba gives a lot more information on that. And go ahead and check his video out. Archon Invasion Part 1. Archon Invasion Part 1 by Rob Skiba for more information about Canaan and the Nephilim and the giants, et cetera, at this time. But yeah, the Egyptians, they had control of the land way earlier on when Abraham moved there, but not by this time. They did not have it after the Exodus for sure. At the latest, they added to the Exodus, and no later than that. So, so ancient Near Eastern historians like Egyptologists are wrong about the time of the judges, and and Egypt only had influence over the Nile since then. Um, so, um, let's see. So very, very interesting stuff. So just So this is interesting. Leroy's here. She's like, don't mention the end times. That's what people care about. They don't care about this ancient history stuff. They care about the future. So, all right. So now this is pretty interesting. So, since this timeline is correct, and we're in the year 5,913, That means that, like, a lot of people say that all of history is represented by creation, right? You have 6 days of God working, right? Creation, and then seventh day he rests. And so the 6 days is a parallel for 6,000 years of history. And then the seventh day he rests. That's the Messiah's 1,000-year reign, Revelation chapter 20. And then after that, like, time ends, and then you have the new earth or in the lake of fire after that. So that means if God's perfect and he's got this perfect parallel like he does with everything else, it's so incredible. Like all these parallels, like that go from the beginning and they go all throughout, in the future, from creation all the way to the 1,000-year reign and the new earth. There's parallels all throughout history. And so most likely this is going to be another one of those parallels. Well, that would mean that that Joshua the Messiah is not coming back until another 87 years. So we're all going to be dead. So like we're gonna have to say that for another video, like end time stuff. I'm wanting to touch on it, but I've studied it so much, I've loved it so much, but there's all these different theories out there, and no one really knows. But we'll have to make a whole nother video for that. But and then even if you subtract 7 years from that, 80 years. So the 7 year tribulation wouldn't start until 80 years from now. So everyone needs to chill. Literally for 2,000 years, everyone's going to be like, he's coming back in a year now. I mean, they literally thought that in the authors of the renewed covenant thought that 100%. They thought he was coming back within just a few years. We got to get the word out. He's coming back during their lifetime for sure. They all thought that. And 2,000 years later, he hasn't come back. So in like my entire life too, like the Left Behind series was really popular, and my mom my mom thought that God was going to come back too in her lifetime, maybe in the 60s and the 70s. The point is, everyone for 2,000 years thought that the Messiah was coming back any day now. 2,000 years, 2,000 years, he hasn't come back yet. So, like, so you can't just go off what you want. You have to go off of studying. So I mean, whether you want him to come back, as soon as possible, or you don't want him to come back later, you want to live out your whole life, die of old age, you don't want to get scared in 7 years. It really doesn't matter. It's not up to you. It's just that's one of the things that's already predetermined. And so I mean, what you want really doesn't have anything to do with it at all. So um, I think this is a really fascinating tie-in and insight to end times. So again, things might not start for 80 years from now. So, Christians, you don't just say, "Oh, well, it's the end times. Can't do anything about it anyway. Let's just let everything go to hell. Let's let everything go to crap, and let's not even do anything." What if they said that over the last 6,000 years? What if they said that over the last centuries? Right? That's ridiculous. God requires you to do the best you can with your culture and population during your lifetime. That's the only thing to do, and you will be judged according to that. You have to teach everyone the truth. You have to correct people every day, all day. The enemy's not taking a day off. Satan's not taking a day off. Satan and the left is working every single day to establish his kingdom and his rules and his morality, his culture in our country. What are you doing about it? Nothing? Perhaps you should do something about it. So, no, you don't know that this is not inevitable. You don't know that he's coming back any day now. I've been hearing that my whole life for 35 years. You are supposed to do your very best to teach the truth and correct and enforce God's laws right now. And you'll be held accountable for what you did or didn't do according to that. So, for all of eternity. Okay, so that's a little bit about the end times. We're going to wrap it up here real soon, but let's just take one more gander at it. So I just think this is fascinating. So Adam lived to be 930 years old. Seth wasn't born until Adam was 130. And then Jared lived to be 962 years old. So Genesis 6. So the angels came down during the days of Jared. That's Enoch's dad. Genesis chapter 6. See Rob Skiba for more on that. And then Enoch, he lived for 365 years. 672 years after creation. Methuselah lived 687 years since creation, all the way until the time of the flood. 969 years old. Lamech's dad, died right before the flood. Noah's dad, Lamech. And then Noah lived to be 950 years old. 600 years in the pre-flood world, 500 years in the post-flood world, approximately. Shem lived to be 600 years old, 100 in the pre-flood world, 500 in the post-flood world. And he outlived his kids and grandkids. He outlived all of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Shem outlived Abraham. It's epic. Abraham lived to be 175 years old. and he died halfway during the life of Isaac. So Isaac lived to be 180 years old, Jacob lived to be 147, and Joseph lived to be 110. You know, Jacob said, he said, short and evil have the days of my life been. That's what Jacob said in Genesis. And he said that in Egypt. And he said to Joseph when he moved down, short and evil have the days of my life been. Jacob got to talk with God, lived to 147 years old. Epic, epic indeed. Guys, we need to stop having an evolutionary mindset on it. We've been lied about everything. You're being lied to about everything. If you don't study for yourself, how are you going to know? You're not. If you trust people, you don't know anything. You don't know a darn thing if you trust people. You have to study on your own every day, all the rest of your life. God didn't design you to have a bigger brain than all of the animals proportionally for you not to use it. God, what do you think we're going to be doing for all of eternity? He's going to be teaching us stuff for all of eternity, showing us all of history. And those that prioritize their life accordingly, not playing sports, not watching their Kardashians and going shopping, are going to be glorified forever. And those that don't will be ashamed and may not be qualified at all. So Joseph lived to be 110, and we'll go this other. So yeah, teaching and conviction. Last human migration was just all soft teaching. A lot of my other videos are a lot of conviction. Now we're doing a little bit of both. We're getting all the best world, all the best of all the worlds in here. So epic indeed. So creation to the death of Joseph, 2,309 years. Genesis 5 and 11. Abraham to the Exodus, 430 years. 1872 to 1442. The Hebrews were 210 years in Goshen. Slavery was 116 years. The green here, 480 years, 1 Kings 6:1, from the Exodus, 1442, to the start of the building of the temple during Solomon's reign, 692. Where you can find that it's from Abraham to Exodus is 430 years. Exodus 12:40, Galatians 3:16, 17, Jasher, Jubilees, Josephus, that's 5 witnesses. And I know the Exodus one is a little confusing, so you have 4 other witnesses to clear that up. I highly recommend reading Jasher. You know, it's referenced in canonized scripture 3 different times. You know, Joshua tells you to read it, Samuel tells you to read it, and Paul tells you to read it in Timothy. Epic, epic indeed. And there was only 23. This is so fascinating. Okay, I'm going to list one more fascinating point before we go. There was only 20. I wanted to know this date for so long. I was like, how could they be enslaved when Joseph was the vice pharaoh and they got the best part of all of Egypt? There's only 23 years between Joseph's death to when they were enslaved. It's so crazy. Read the story in Jasher about it. They were actually enslaved immediately upon Levi's death. Levi outlived Joseph. Levi lived to be 137. And in 1 year of Levi's death, an older brother of Joseph, they were enslaved. There was this whole elaborate scheme that they actually established. It was a really like interesting story. So go ahead and read that story for what happened in the in-between site, how they went about enslaving the Hebrews. And then in bondage, this is so interesting. But Moses' birth was a miraculous birth. So his mom was born when they were moving. She was born in 1652. And she was 130 years old when she gave birth to Moses. So Moses' birth was prophesied, like a lot of other births were, a lot of special births. We have, Isaac, right? Abraham and Sarah and Isaac was a special birth that was prophesied. She lost all of her eggs, gave birth anyway. And same thing with John the Baptist and Elizabeth. She gave birth. You know, it was a prophesied miraculous birth. Of course, the Messiah was too. And Samson had a special prophesied birth as well. So this was one more time. So Moses' birth was special, and it was supernatural and miraculous. So Yoshabel, his mom, was 130 giving birth to Moses. And there's a really epic story. Moses lived in Egypt for 40 years. You know what? I'm gonna let you read Jasher about it. It is very fascinating indeed. But yeah, bondage was 116 years. Epic, epic, epic. So, all right, it's and it's this history looks so young because we've been so brainwashed for so long. But oh my gosh, like this, it's so old. I can't believe I study history every day for fun. I love it. It's my passion. I can't believe how long history has gone on, and it looks like we've got like 80 years left, 87 years left. But I can't imagine living even just a generation ago. I can't imagine living in 1899. That was 124 years ago. I can't imagine even living 124 years ago for all this comfort and technology. Neither can you. I can't imagine living in 1899, let alone hundreds and thousands of years ago. So this history is old. You've been lied to. You've been brainwashed. This history is epically old. I can't believe God allowed history to go on for so long. But it is in the scheme of things almost over. Not in our lifetime, but in the scheme of history. So, all right, I'm gonna end it there so it doesn't get too long, 45 minutes. But um, uh, thank you guys for sticking around and watching the entire thing all the way through. Oh yeah, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. Click that bell button, subscribe, and get the notifications. Click the like button, like it, and share it. Please do share it, indeed, and watch all of our other 24 videos as well. So I'm Joel, Western Culture Through God's Eyes. I was so excited. I finally brought this video to fruition. A shout out to Lior, my wifey. She put this, I had this timeline on like a written, black and white piece of paper, and she put it to a digital format, made it all beautiful in color and digitized for you guys. So lifelong dream accomplished. All right, thanks for watching. Make sure you guys and then feel free to like join our group on Facebook. It's the same name. And then we're also on TikTok as well. All right, guys, have a great day. Thanks for watching.